I'm assuming that since you're watching this, you actually know who Kiyoshi Kurosawa is, which puts you in sort of a minority even among aficionados of Asian genre material. Kurosawa is still, partly because he's rather a sort of button down, quiet individual, he's still rather underknown compared in a field that has really flamboyant characters like Shinya Tsukamoto or Takashi Miike. He can seem rather staid, although in fact I think he is probably the you know the genre filmmaker who is currently working absolutely at the top of his game. It's 2018 now, and he's had two contrasting, interesting genre films out in the last year. A daguerreotype shot in France, and Before We Vanish, a science fiction movie made in Japan, following his stalker movie, the aptly named Creepy. And these three films are his return to genre after a run of making movies like Tokyo Sonata and Journey to the Shore, which are much more biddable art house export type pictures. They're a return to this run of movies he made from the mid 1990s to the early 2000s. He was born in 1955. He made his first film in 1975, and he worked very hard, turning out like Miki did. Very low budget genre movies, yakuza films, horror films, for grindhouse and then for video distribution. But Cure was the movie. It came out before Ring, which was the film that broke J horror internationally, and it actually has a few similarities with those Curse, Ring, Grudge type movies. Although its monstrous figure is not a female ghost but a living man, although he does have floppy black hair, but that kind of goes with the territory, and a strange sort of affectless presence. What he doesn't have is a motivation for spreading evil and malice. It is purely randomly awful what the villain of Cure is doing. But there are things like the rash of suicides and the rash of inexplicable murders, which recur in a few other things. Suicide Club has a sort of similar thing. The idea of crazes, which is sort of embedded in Japanese popular culture. And here, of course, it's a craze for murders that seem utterly random, but of course turn out to be linked by the figure who goes around whispering. It's a cop movie. The detective is played by Koji Yakusho, who actually is a bigger star in Japan than you might think. I mean, Shall We Dance was his big international hit. As a Japanese star, he's probably on a level with somebody like Richard Gere in that he does a wide range of leading man roles from quite light to quite serious. He hooked up with Kurosawa for the peculiar reason that they were born in the same month. And Kurosawa seems to have latched on him as a sort of an avatar or a doppelganger. They actually made a film called Doppelganger, and they they don't really look alike, but they sort of have a similar presence. And they made a whole run of films together in which plainly the star is sort of the projection of the director writer's personality and interests, and quite often within the films there are doppelganger characters as well. This is the story that you're familiar with from things like Seven or even Dirty Harry, of the cop and the killer who are prone to exchanging places. It's sort of ambiguous as to what actually happens, but I get a sense that what you're supposed to feel about the finale is that the cure the cop has found is to get equilibrium in his own life by becoming the next version of the killer. And again, it's a remote control killer, as in the Death Note movies, for instance. Kurosawa talks about the kind of American filmmakers who influenced him, and he's really interested in. And actually, he has a really narrow focus on a run of people I like too: Robert Aldrich, Sam Peckinpah, Arthur Penn, the people who are making sort of tough, gritty, strange thrillers in the early part of the 1970s before the blockbuster mentality came in and took over Don Siegel. The filmmaker he doesn't mention, who I think there's a sort of connection with here, is Larry Cohen. It strikes me that Cure could almost be a remake of Larry Cohen's God Told Me To, aka Demon, with the science fictional elements removed. God Told Me To has a very similar setup of the policeman who's investigating a series of apparently unconnected random murders. There's even a setup where somebody approaches a character who's sat on top of a building who then throws himself off that recurs in both films. I don't know if this is an actual influence or just a coincidence. They happen to be dealing in a very similar material. They would make a great double bill, actually. They work together really interestingly and do different things. Kurosawa, for somebody who talks about this sort of muscular American macho thriller style, there is actually a sort of a chase scene in this film, which is really unusual because Kurosawa doesn't do much in the way of action. He's much more comfortable with people in rooms not saying much to each other, almost like a scary version of Ozu. But there's actually a really good location-based, run over some rooftops and a bit of jumping. He talks about how difficult it is in Tokyo finding buildings that aren't clean and don't look new, and so he purposely tracks down disused, beaten up, decayed buildings. They all look like run-down hospitals or former institutions or closed schools. It's concrete with staining on or cracked windows, and he plainly loves places like this. They recur a bit in some of the later J horrors. Have a bit of that. Dark Water is set in an apartment building that looks a bit like that, and that takes on the theme of water seeping through the ceilings, which is in Cure as well. But there's a wonderful sort of really simple shot of a chase scene through the windows of the side of a big grubby building. It's actually a bravura moment in a film that doesn't have that many of them. He's not that interested in the big splashy effects. There's one really astonishing moment of gore in the movie as well, but he realizes you only need that once. And mostly the scary, creepy stuff here is just to do with this formless feeling of urban anomie that you get in all this run of movies. He films Tokyo rather in the way that Michelangelo Antonioni films Rome in L'Eclisse or L'Avventura, like staying away from the Trevi Fountain and the Vatican and the Colosseum and just going to the new builds on the outskirts where there are fields and concrete blocks and then buildings where there's not much on. And the Tokyo of Kurosawa's films is very much like that. You almost don't feel you're in a city. The sense of no center also applies to all the characters. Seem to have their worlds slightly ajar. They're not quite working properly. They've not separated their domestic and their personal spaces. They're still disturbingly trying to go through the motions of living the lives they're supposed to be living, and the sinister figure of the amnesiac who's not interested in his own past but is interested in the people he talks to and seems to infect them with a desire to kill horribly. There's a sense that that's it, that the world has been taken away from these people. Pulse, which actually does have an apocalypse, yeah, and actually Before We Vanish also has a sense of impending doom for the world, and it's almost like this run of little films from Kurosawa. I think you can relate it, say, to the run of films Val Lewton made, or a recent Hollywood analog would be M. Night Shyamalan, who I think also has a kind of feel of what Kurosawa is doing, although Kurosawa broke before Shyamalan did. There is this sense of a worldview that is doom-haunted. It's depressing, but it has touches of weird humor, and although it's about people who are disconnected, there is a strange empathy in the films. I find them affecting and terrifying. They do have, in their own strange way, jump scares, what Val Lewton called the bus. There are moments in them that are genuinely shocking and make you jump, but equally he can stage his horror sequences in an almost Bressonian way, just plonking the camera down and watching it. Several of the murders in Cure are shocking because we don't go in for the close-up. We just stand back and watch people casually going about their businesses and then suddenly sort of deciding to kill someone and then performing an appalling mutilation and then just getting on with their daily lives, as if the act of murder has wiped out the impulse to commit murder and the memory of it as well, and sort of blotted out whole elements of personality. There is a sense that these are partial people. And of course, the downside of that is that you can watch these films and feel that there's a kind of woodenness there. If you were to chance on a movie like this on late night TV and miss the beginning and not be paying attention much, it can look kind of cheap because he's gone for a cheap look. The characterizations, they are broad strokes, but they're inexpressive. He goes, another of his film idols, Don Siegel, of course, made Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and there's almost the sense that this is that his films take place in the world of the body snatched. These are people who don't quite realize what's missing from their lives, and it's a consistent and terrifying and interesting vision, and I hope that this release encourages people to go back and look at this whole run of Kurosawa's sort of mid-period, I suppose we have to call them supernatural thrillers. They are fringe of several different genres, but they are ineffably his own work. He is, I would say, one of the few absolutely pure auteur filmmakers currently working in scary movies, and therefore should be prized